pretty good team.
That was pretty. It was
What
pretty
made
decent.
that team so good, you two?
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Shan Carter is gone. Not suspended in the way fans are used to seeing. Not benched for a few games, not fined, not quietly disciplined behind the scenes.
Gone. Just like that.
The kind of disappearance that doesn't come with a countdown or a return date. The kind that sends a message far beyond a single player. Because what happened here wasn't just a punishment. It felt like an erasure. One moment on the court, one decision made in a split second, and suddenly a career that had been built over 6 long years was hanging by a thread, and then it snapped. At first glance, people tried to reduce it to a single play. A shove. A collision. A heated moment in the middle of a competitive game. The kind of thing basketball has seen before. But this wasn't treated like anything the league had seen before. There was no gradual escalation, no series of warnings, no public back and forth. Instead, it felt immediate, final, and calculated. And that's where the Real story begins, because what happened on that court was only the surface of something much deeper. The game itself didn't start as anything unusual. It was just another regular season matchup between the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky. On paper, it was competitive. In reality, it became something else entirely. The arena was alive in a way that would have seemed impossible just a couple of years ago. Every seat filled, every voice loud, every camera focused. This wasn't just a game anymore, it was a moment in the league's growth. The WNBA had been building momentum, and nights like this were proof of how far it had come. And at the center of it all was Caitlin Clark. She wasn't just playing, she was controlling everything. The tempo, the rhythm, the spacing. Every pass felt intentional, every shot felt inevitable. She was stretching the floor in ways defenders couldn't keep up with, hitting shots from distances that forced entire defensive schemes to collapse. And as she did it, you could feel the pressure building on the other side. Chicago wasn't just losing ground, they were losing composure.
You could see it in the small things.
Rotations that were just a step too slow. Communication that started to break down. Frustration creeping into every movement. Because when a team starts getting exposed in front of a packed arena, under bright lights, with millions watching, it hits differently. It's not just about the scoreboard anymore, it's about pride, about perception, about control slipping away in real time. That's the part most people ignore when they talk about what happened next. Because what happened next didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of pressure. It came out of frustration. It came out of a moment where emotions crossed a line that should never be crossed. Carter didn't react to a play. There was no loose ball, no contested shot, no physical battle under the rim. There was no basketball reason. She walked up behind Clark, calm, deliberate, and delivered a full-force shove that had nothing to do with the game itself. And in that instant, everything changed. Clark hit the floor hard, and the arena went silent. Not the kind of silence that follows a tough foul or a controversial call. Not the kind where fans immediately start yelling, arguing, reacting. This was something else. This was the kind of silence where thousands of people stop at the same time because they know, instantly, that they've just witnessed something that doesn't belong. Players froze. Coaches stopped mid-sentence. Even the whistle felt delayed, like reality itself had to catch up with what just happened. Then came the replays. Angle after angle, slow motion after slow motion, and every single one told the same story. There was no misinterpretation, no gray area, no benefit of the doubt. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't reactive. It was a decision. And that's what made it different. Analysts who had spent decades around the game didn't hesitate. They had seen hard fouls. They had seen rivalries boil over. They had seen moments where emotions took control. But this didn't fit into any of those categories. There was no basketball purpose behind it. None. And what happened immediately after may have said even more than the shove itself. Carter didn't check on Clark. Didn't pause. Didn't acknowledge it. She walked away like it was routine. Like it was just another part of the game. But it wasn't. Clark got up, brushed it off, and kept playing. No scene, no retaliation, no drama. Just composure. And in that contrast, you could already feel the narrative shifting. Because sometimes it's not just what happens, it's how people respond to it. The game continued. The clock ran out. The final buzzer sounded.
And with Noel Quinn, as you mentioned, no challenge. Clark.
But the real outcome had already been decided. Because somewhere beyond the court, beyond the arena, beyond the cameras, the league had already taken notice. And once the league sees something like that, it doesn't forget. When the official statement finally came out, it didn't sound like the usual carefully worded response fans are used to. There was no soft language, no attempt to downplay, no effort to keep things neutral. The words were direct,
Sharp.
intentional. Carter's actions weren't described as excessive or unnecessary. They were described as a deliberate act that went against the core values of professional basketball. That kind of wording matters, because leagues don't choose words like that by accident. They choose them when they want to send a message. And the message here was loud. The punishment wasn't a simple suspension. It was indefinite, with conditions for reinstatement. And on the surface, that might sound standard. It might sound like the kind of process that allows a player to work their way back. But this wasn't standard, not even close. Behind the scenes, the details told a completely different story. The conditions weren't just strict, they were overwhelming. Hundreds of hours of required commitments, evaluations with no clear timeline, restrictions that would make it nearly impossible to maintain any kind of professional rhythm. And layered on top of all of that, a system that offered no clear path back. It wasn't just a suspension. It was a barrier, a wall built high enough that climbing it would take more than effort. It would take time, resources, and a level of access that most players simply don't have. And that's where the perception started to shift. Because when a system is built like that, people start asking questions. Is this about discipline? Or is this about removal? The league never called it a ban. But to many watching, it felt like one. A way to enforce the outcome without using the word. A way to close the door without officially locking it. And in professional sports, that kind of approach isn't accidental. It's strategic. It protects the league legally while still delivering a consequence that achieves its intended effect. One executive, speaking off the record, didn't try to soften it. The message was clear in their tone, even if the words were measured. This wasn't about correction. This wasn't about teaching a lesson. This was about ending something. And when you look at the ripple effects, it becomes even more clear. Because the damage didn't stop at the court. It spread outward. Contracts didn't just pause, they disappeared. Opportunities didn't just shrink, they vanished. Endorsement conversations that had been active suddenly went silent. Brands that had shown interest stepped back almost immediately. And in a league that is just now beginning to unlock its full commercial potential, that kind of shift is massive. For a player, it's not just about losing games. It's about losing momentum, losing visibility, losing the future that was being built. And all of it traced back to a single moment. 6 seconds. That's all it took. 6 seconds to change everything. But here's the part that still doesn't sit right with a lot of people. Because moments like this don't happen in isolation. They build. They develop. They grow beneath the surface until something finally breaks through. And when you start looking at the timeline, at the quiet incidents, at the unspoken tensions, it becomes harder to believe this was just about one shove. It starts to look like something the league had been watching for a long time, something they were waiting to act on. And when the moment finally came, they didn't hesitate. They made it count. Because sometimes a league doesn't just respond to an incident. Sometimes it uses that incident to draw a line that every player sees, a line that every team understands, a line that says, this is where it stops. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. So the question isn't just why this happened. The real question is why it happened like this. Why the response was so immediate, so final, so absolute. Because whatever the answer is, it doesn't just affect one player. It affects the entire league. Every locker room, every coach, every rising star. Because now, everyone knows the consequences aren't what they used to be. And the margin for error? It might be smaller than ever.
Here comes Sabali.
Now let's talk about the part of the story that goes far beyond the court. Because what Carter lost wasn't just a roster spot. It was an entire future that had been quietly building in the background. When people hear the word suspension, they usually think short-term, missed games, lost minutes, maybe some fines. But this situation is something completely different. This is about long-term damage, the kind that doesn't just disappear when the headlines fade. You have to factor in everything that comes next, the contracts she won't sign, the teams that won't take the risk, the roster spots that will now go to someone else. And then there's the part most fans don't immediately think about: life after basketball. Coaching roles, media opportunities, player development positions, those doors don't just open based on talent. They open based on reputation. And now, whether it's fair or not, there's a permanent question mark attached to her name. When you put all of that together, the financial impact becomes staggering. Estimates already suggest losses exceeding $1, $2 million, and some projections go even higher. In a league like the WNBA, where salaries are already a fraction of what players in the NBA earn, that kind of money isn't just significant, it's career-defining. Every contract matters. Every endorsement matters. Every opportunity matters. And losing that much doesn't just set a player back. It can effectively end the trajectory they were on. That's why the real question isn't simply whether the punishment was too harsh. The deeper question, the one that isn't being asked loudly enough, is whether that shove was truly the reason for everything that followed, or if it was just the final trigger. Because punishments like this don't come together overnight. They aren't built in a few hours after a game. They are constructed over time, piece by piece, when a league or an organization has been watching, evaluating, and documenting for much longer than the public realizes. And once you start looking back, the timeline begins to tell a very different story. Go back to 2019. The Atlanta Dream. Carter enters the league as the 4th overall pick, carrying expectations that matched her undeniable talent. She had everything teams look for: a dynamic scoring ability, explosive athleticism, defensive intensity, and that rare first step that forces defenders into impossible situations. On draft night, it looked like the beginning of something special. The franchise believed they had found a cornerstone player. Fans were excited. The organization was confident. Everything pointed toward a bright future. But within months, things started shifting behind the scenes. There were internal conversations, quiet ones at first, the kind teams try to handle privately. A confrontation in the locker room between Carter and Courtney Williams escalated in a way that shook the entire organization. And that detail matters more than it might seem at first glance. Courtney Williams isn't known for conflict. She has a reputation across the league as one of the most positive, steady, and even-tempered players you can have in a locker room. She's the kind of veteran presence that young players are expected to learn from, not clash with. So when a situation involving her reaches a point where it nearly turns physical, it doesn't stay small. It doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It affects the locker room dynamic. It changes how coaches run practices. It forces the front office to start asking difficult questions about the future of the roster. And most importantly, it creates a kind of tension that doesn't show up in box scores or post-game interviews, but is felt by everyone inside the organization. Carter's time in Atlanta didn't end the way anyone expected. The promise was still there, but the foundation around it had already started to crack. She moved on to the Los Angeles Sparks, and on paper, it looked like the perfect reset. New city, new teammates, new coaching staff, a clean slate. Every player who gets a second chance hopes for exactly that kind of opportunity. But sometimes, a fresh start only works if the pattern changes. And in this case, it didn't. Reports began to surface about issues during film sessions, the unglamorous but critical part of professional basketball where teams build chemistry, trust, and understanding. These sessions are where players learn how to read each other, how to anticipate movements, how to function as a unit. Disrupting that process isn't just disruptive, it's damaging. And yet, Carter reportedly began interrupting coaches, dismissing tactical input, and at times even walking out entirely. Not once, not twice, but enough times that it stopped being an isolated incident and became something the entire organization had to work around. The Sparks tried to manage it. They adjusted. They attempted to find solutions.
And laid it in, she's got 20.
But eventually, they reached a conclusion that still stands out as one of the most telling decisions in recent WNBA memory. They paid Carter approximately $90,000, nearly a third of their salary cap, not to trade her, not to restructure her role, but simply to part ways. Think about that for a moment. In a league where players often accept pay cuts just to stay on competitive teams, one franchise chose to spend a significant portion of its financial resources just to remove a single player from the environment. That's not a routine transaction. That's a statement. IT says that whatever is happening behind the scenes is costing more than money. It's costing stability, chemistry, and long-term success. After that, Carter landed with the Chicago Sky. Another opportunity, another chance to reset the narrative. And for a while, it seemed like things might stabilize. But the real insight into what was happening didn't come from statistics or performances. It came from silence. Because in the WNBA, silence is rare. This is a league built on solidarity. Players support each other publicly and consistently. When one of them faces discipline, teammates usually speak up. They offer context, they show support, they make it clear that the situation isn't one-dimensional. That's the culture. It has been for years. But this time, something was different. After Carter's ban, there were no statements from her teammates, no public defense, no anonymous sources suggesting the punishment was excessive.
No quiet pushback.
Nothing. Complete silence from the very locker room she had shared all season. And in this league, that kind of silence isn't neutral. It's intentional. It's a choice. Because everyone inside that organization understood exactly what not speaking would communicate. And then there was Angel Reese. Throughout the season, Reese and Carter appeared to have built a genuine connection. They were seen together at team events, interacting in ways that went beyond simple teammate interactions. It looked like a real friendship, something fans noticed, something the media picked up on. There was a sense that they enjoyed each other's company, that there was trust there. And then, within hours of the incident, that connection disappeared. Reese unfollowed Carter across every social media platform.
No announcement. No explanation.
No statement. Just gone.
Clean.
Immediate. Deliberate. And that action spoke louder than any press conference ever could. Because she didn't have to do it publicly. She could have created distance quietly, over time, without anyone noticing. But the speed and visibility of that unfollow made it impossible to ignore. Whether intentional or not, it sent a clear message to everyone watching. And when you combine that with everything else, subtle changes in social media behavior, cryptic posts about accountability and respect, the noticeable absence of Carter in team bonding content, you start to see a pattern. Individually, each of those details might not mean much, but together, they form a picture of a locker room that had already begun to separate itself long before the incident in Indiana ever happened. These weren't coincidences. They were signals. Signals from people on the inside who had been watching something unfold quietly, something that never made headlines, never appeared in official statements, never became public until it couldn't be contained anymore. And that brings us back to the moment that changed everything. Because for all the complexity, for all the history, for all the buildup, it may have only taken 30 seconds to alter the entire outcome. 30 seconds. That's all it would have taken to shift the narrative. A simple acknowledgement, a direct apology, a moment of accountability that showed awareness, understanding, and responsibility. I crossed a line. I know it. It won't happen again. That's it. 30 seconds could have introduced doubt. It could have softened the response. It could have given the league, the teams, and the fans something to work with. But that moment didn't happen. Carter had the opportunity at the post-game press conference, a chance to address everything directly, to take control of the narrative before it fully formed. And in situations like this, those moments matter more than anything else. Because once the narrative is set, once the perception hardens, it becomes incredibly difficult to change. And that's what makes this story so compelling and so complicated. Because on the surface, it looks like a single incident that led to a severe punishment. But underneath, it feels like the conclusion of something much longer. Something that had been building quietly, step by step, moment by moment, decision by decision. Until finally, there was nothing left to ignore. And when that moment came, everything changed.
It's not about your competition, who you're playing. It's about being confident in who.
What happened next may have been even more important than the incident itself, because this is where perception turned into reality. Carter walked into that post-game press conference with a body language that told its own story before she even said a single word. Arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes already showing frustration, subtle but noticeable reactions picked up by the microphones. Everything about the moment felt tense. It didn't feel like someone preparing to address a serious situation. It felt like someone trying to brush past it. And in moments like this, where the entire league is watching, where fans, analysts, and executives are all waiting to see how a player responds, those small details matter more than anything. The first direct question came quickly. A reporter asked about the incident with Caitlin Clark, simple, direct, unavoidable. And Carter's response immediately shifted the tone of the entire room. Instead of acknowledging the moment, instead of addressing what everyone had just seen, she redirected. She said she was focused on the next game, not the play. That it had already happened. That it was over. That it was just basketball. That there was no reason to keep talking about it. On the surface, that might sound like an attempt to move forward. But in that context, in that moment, it landed very differently. Because it didn't sound like composure. It sounded like dismissal. And the room felt it. The silence that followed wasn't the same silence from the arena earlier. It was heavier, more deliberate. It was the kind of quiet where people aren't shocked anymore, they're processing. They're realizing that the response they were expecting isn't coming. And when reporters pressed again, giving her another chance, another opening to reflect, to recalibrate, to show even a small level of accountability, she didn't take it. She doubled down. She made it clear she had no regrets about how she handled it, no urgency to address it sooner, no sense that anything about the situation required deeper thought. And in that moment, everything became clear, not just to the media, not just to the fans, but to the league. Because the issue was no longer just the shove. It was the response to it. It was the inability or unwillingness to recognize why it mattered. Professional sports aren't just about talent. They're about awareness, growth, and understanding the weight of your actions in a shared environment. And what executives saw in that press conference wasn't just a player defending herself. It was a player who didn't seem to recognize the line she had crossed. One veteran media member described it in a way that stuck with everyone who heard it. After years of covering press conferences, after seeing countless controversies and comebacks, they said that was the first time they had watched a player effectively end their own career in real time. Not with the initial act, but with the reaction that followed it. And once that moment happened, the outcome felt inevitable. The decision from the league came shortly after. And for those who had watched that press conference closely, there was no surprise left. The tone had been set. The narrative had solidified. The opportunity to reshape the situation had passed. So now the question shifts. What comes next? Because while the WNBA door may have closed, the world of basketball is bigger than a single league. There are international opportunities, European teams, overseas contracts, alternative paths that have helped players rebuild their careers before. That used to be a reliable safety net, a second chance, a place where talent could still open doors even if things didn't work out domestically. But the landscape has changed. International teams have become far more selective. It's no longer just about skill. It's about the full picture: chemistry, professionalism, adaptability, reputation. Teams investing in players want stability. They want reliability. They want individuals who can contribute not just on the court, but within the structure of an organization. And when a player carries a highly publicized situation like this, combined with a documented history across multiple teams, it becomes a much more complicated decision. Agents who work in that international space have been clear about it. The market for players with concerns around behavior or consistency has tightened significantly. Years ago, talent alone might have been enough to overcome those questions. That's no longer the case. Now, teams weigh everything equally. And for Carter, the combination is difficult to ignore: a widely discussed incident, a history of internal issues, and a press conference that circulated for all the wrong reasons. And in today's digital world, those things don't fade. They don't disappear. They stay searchable. They stay attached. That's what makes the financial impact even more significant.
Absolutely blown the roof off.
But playing at UConn, she is.
It's not just about what has already been lost. It's about what will never materialize. Endorsement deals that were reportedly close to being finalized disappeared almost immediately. Brands stepped back because in marketing, perception is everything. Companies don't just invest in performance, they invest in image. And once that image becomes uncertain, the risk outweighs the reward. When analysts started calculating the difference between the career Carter was projected to have and the reality she now faces, the numbers became even more striking. Some estimates suggest that the total gap in potential earnings could exceed $4 million. That includes contracts, sponsorships, and post-career opportunities that may no longer be accessible. And the most striking part? She's only 25 years old. This wasn't the end of a long career winding down. This was supposed to be the beginning of a prime. The years where everything comes together: skill, experience, opportunity. She had the talent to reach that level, the physical tools, the ability to become a consistent star, to earn all-star selections, to build long-term financial security. But talent alone isn't enough. And that's the central theme of this entire story. Because what stood in the way wasn't injury. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't circumstance. It was decisions. And decisions don't heal the way injuries do.
They stay.
They define trajectories. And when you compare that path to someone like Caitlin Clark, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Clark entered the league under a level of pressure that few rookies have ever experienced. The expectations were massive. The media attention was constant. Every performance analyzed, every moment amplified. And then, in the middle of all of that, she was shoved to the floor on national television. That could have turned into a defining controversy. It could have become a distraction. It could have escalated. But it didn't. Because of how she responded. She got up and kept playing. No dramatic reaction.
No escalación.
And in the days that followed, every time the incident was brought up, she redirected the conversation. Back to basketball. Back to her team. Back to improvement and winning. She didn't fuel the moment, she minimized it. That kind of composure isn't easy. And it isn't common. A former All-Star pointed out that you can't teach that level of poise. It's something that reveals itself naturally, especially under pressure. And that's what made the contrast so powerful. Two players in the same moment, facing the same situation, chose completely different responses. One lowered the noise and focused forward. The other reinforced the tension and pushed back. And in a league that is growing rapidly, that difference matters more than ever. The WNBA is experiencing a surge, viewership climbing, merchandise sales reaching new highs, attention expanding beyond what it has ever seen before. And players like Clark are a major part of that momentum. They represent the direction the league is heading, the identity it is building, the audience it is attracting. So when the league made its decision, it wasn't just about discipline. It was about direction. It was about defining what kind of league they want to be moving forward. And that choice, in this case, wasn't complicated. Because while Carter had undeniable talent, explosiveness, scoring ability, defensive intensity, it wasn't enough to outweigh everything else. Talent can open doors, but it doesn't guarantee that you stay inside. Without accountability, without growth, without alignment with the broader structure of a team and a league, even the most gifted players can find themselves on the outside. It's like having a powerful engine with no steering. Eventually, something goes wrong. And that's why this story will last. Not because of the shove itself, but because of what it represents. It will be talked about in locker rooms, in team meetings, in conversations between coaches and young players. Not as a warning about physical play, but as a lesson about mindset, about responsibility, about understanding the bigger picture. Because at this level, it's never just about what you do. It's about how you handle what you do. The league moves forward. It continues to grow, to evolve, to build its identity around players who represent its future. And as for Carter, her story isn't fully finished yet, but the direction of it has undeniably changed. And whether it turns into a comeback story or a cautionary tale, that answer is still being written.